Hey, what's up, everybody? Tom Curran's Patriots Talk Podcast. Happy New Year, everyone. We got a special New Year's guest. He's a special guest anytime he shows up, though. It's Brian Hoyer, former Patriots quarterback, former Patriots for 9 teams around the National Football League and a 15-season career. So he knows what's going on, and he cares deeply about your New England Patriots. How are you, bud?
I'm good, Tom. How are you? Happy New Year.
Thanks, buddy. And first things first, I have so much enjoyed having you as part of our media contingent this year. I think you've been excellent, and it's really cool to get to know somebody on a different plane and develop a friendship with someone.
Yeah, you kind of got me started on this podcast back in, I don't know, what was that, March, April maybe? But I think we were talking before the draft about should they draft Drake Maye. So it's been great. I always loved working with you as a player and now as a colleague. We kind of got into it the first time the other day on the post-game show about the lateral play. I enjoyed that, a little back and forth banter. And but no, you've been great all year and helping me along kind of in this new journey. And I appreciate you.
Where do we get to fighting in a couple of months about whether or not they should take a tight end?
Yeah.
All right. Made it easy. I sent you a quick bullet point outline for this podcast. And the first thing was a 3-step plan for fixing the offense. You can strip it down as much as you want into 3 quick bullet points.
Ooh, 3 points. That's all I get. One would be the offensive line, right? That's obviously one of the biggest struggles. And I know
that's number 1. Sorry.
Oh,
no,
yeah,
I was giving the number 1. Sorry.
Me. Yep. That's number 1. Because look, no good play starts without the offensive line doing their job. And a lot of times they're unheralded. You lose a guy like David Andrews early in the year who's going to basically make all the calls. That's a devastating loss. And then you're dealing with young players and Mike Onwenu's playing all over the place. There's a constant rotation. You need to solidify that first and foremost because nothing goes without those guys. So address it in free agency and address it in the draft. Obviously, my goal would be sign a left tackle, sign a guard, and then you still draft a tackle. Maybe who knows where my podcast co-host David Andrews, he's working his butt off to get back, but you don't know. So you got to figure out how you can address that, and it starts in free agency. 2 would then go to the receivers. You need a true number 1 guy. You need another guy who, even if you can't, I think there's only one true number 1 in free agency. That's T. Higgins. Can you afford him? Are you going to be able to entice him to come here? If not, there's guys like Chris Godwin, DeAndre Hopkins. I think you need someone like that, an established guy who can walk into that room and kind of be an alpha dog. And then that still allows you for a chance to draft one as well. And so I think that's that 2-headed monster attack right there. And then lastly is just continue to develop Drake with his fundamentals, his understanding of the game. That's a huge thing in the offseason. He's made leaps and bounds, but there's a whole offseason for him to work on having a better base, not getting too much depth in the pocket, stepping up in the pocket, which if you solidify that offensive line, he'll have more confidence in doing that. And so I think getting the right people, and I think AVP and TC McCartney have done a great job. They've had obviously having Jacoby Brissett, a veteran guy that he can learn how to be a professional, just the ins and outs of meetings, studying film, all of those things. Keep surrounding him with good people that he can continue to learn from, because now you have the guy who's the face of the franchise. You got to do everything in your power to surround him with the talent, the coaching, all of those things that are going to allow him to continue to grow.
That leads perfectly into my next question, which is more specifically, what are the 3 areas of improvement for Drake Maye? And I've heard you mention it a number of times. It's depth of drop, and I think that other former quarterbacks and analysts around the league have mentioned that little factor about depth of drop. And we could even use that swing pass that turned into the Hindenburg last week as a good
that one
example.
He didn't get enough depth on. So it was like kind of
it's like, oh my God, situation. Play. What do I do? This guy is in my way. That guy's behind me. I got to do something here, and probably should have just laid down like a calf in the middle of the pasture.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times I see on drop back passes, and part of that system is they still believe in taking a 5-step drop out of the gun. When I played for Josh and Tom, we never did that because we realized the further you get back, the faster those edge guys can get there. So now you got to immediately step up. So if you ever had the time to look and watch Tom Brady's drops from the shotgun, compared to Drake's, he's not getting Tom would not get that deep. And so right there, you're taking some of that stress off of those tackles. Well, if you're going to get that deep, now you have to immediately push up. And so now you have to have a concrete wall in front of you that's creating that pocket. And still, even with that, sometimes I see Drake take that.
And that's your interior offensive line. That's your main guys. The front
like
three.
Your center and your two guards. They got to stay solid.
And they can't have screwed up any of the twists or turns or anything that happen in the middle.
Right. And sometimes I see him take that drop in the gun and then even a shuffle back even further. And so now it's like I'm sitting there watching like, oh my God, step up, because you're going to be more the further back you get. And Joe Thomas, Hall of Fame left tackle I played with in Cleveland, and I always use this story to explain things to people. This guy's a Hall of Famer, set a record for consecutive snaps at the tackle position, all of those things. And he would tell me, if your back foot is under 10 yards, I got you. The moment you get past 10, you're on your own. So that's coming from one of the greatest of all time, because the reality is these pass rushers are so athletic. They're so fast. They're getting off on the snap count, all of those things. You can help the offensive lineman out by not getting too deep. And I think sometimes he tends to, especially maybe when the play's not happening in rhythm, to take that extra hop. And that's something you just got to drill out of yourself. And then number two, I would say continue to use his base. He's a big, tall guy. Sometimes he stands very erect, straight up. And if you watch a guy like Josh Allen, similar height, he's got a wider base, and it allows you to always be ready to throw. And I think that's something he can work on. And then lastly, I think, look, we learned it this past weekend. He's going to have to learn how to take care of himself. He plays a game a certain way. He's already had one head injury. He was halfway to another one the other day. You got to learn when the journey's over. You got to learn if it's the first drive of the game. I don't need to try to be Superman to get that first down. If it's the end of the game and the game's on the line, that's a different story. But those are things that will all come with experience and learning and just look, he's played a lot of football as a rookie, probably more than anyone thought he was going to. And just through osmosis and absorption of having played that's going to sink in over the offseason. He's going to drill all these things. And when he comes back in the spring, he's going to be so far advanced from where he was this year. I mean, imagine what this kid has gone through. He was playing in college, goes through OTAs. You're not going to be the starter. All right, now we know going in, like, you're going to have this whole January, February, March into April to get your body ready, learn about yourself, study the things that you can get better at. It's really your first pro season, because the whirlwind leading up to your rookie year, you're doing the rookie premiere. You got all these things going on. Now you've established yourself as an NFL player. You have your offseason. You're going into offseason knowing, all right, I need a little rest, but I have a plan of what I'm going to do. And that's part of being a great pro. And I think he'll continue to improve when he's able to work on these things in the offseason.
Is he in the right system under Alex Van Pelt? Are there enough answers for him pre-snap and post-snap? And I ask that question because we watched against the Chargers this past week and then the week prior. I'm losing my capacity. Oh, Buffalo, toward the end of the game.
Yep.
Buffalo started bringing two guys off the left every time, and we were watching it together, and he said he doesn't have a pre-snap answer. Yep. So it would be two guys off the left, him sprinting to the right sideline and throwing on the run with question mark over his head as to, I don't know what to do here.
Yep. No, I think look, in any system you can get to that point. I've played in all of them, and they all handle a little bit differently. So with Josh, it might be having alerted plays in the huddle. With Kyle, it was built in hot routes. So those things usually tend to grow as the players grow in the system. And so this is the first year. Drake's a rookie. They want to keep it a certain way from him, keep it simple. But I think he's shown he has the capacity to do those things. So you have more check with me plays, and that's all available in that West Coast system. It's just a matter of how comfortable does he feel, how comfortable does Alex Van Pelt and the rest of the players feel. I mean, there's one thing if the quarterback can handle it, but if the other players can't handle it, you can't put them in that situation. Right. And so there's a lot. Look, we all can sit here, and until you're in the building and you understand what's going on, sometimes you're limited in what you can do as far as how much can you put on the group? The quarterback doing it, I mean, look, we witnessed it for all those years, because if you couldn't get to Tom Brady's level, you weren't going to be in the system, and then you weren't going to be on the team. Right now, I think they're trying to figure out, okay, Drake's a rookie. How much can he handle? The more that he takes on, the more the other players are going to have to take on, because when your quarterback forces you to go that route, then you need players that can kind of keep up with him mentally as well. That's
really interesting. And it's something that's not adequately considered. And when you do consider that, you have to really scrutinize the coaching, not just the offensive coordination, but the position coaches, the people who are the supervisors for each particular quote-unquote department, and whether or not they're reaching the players who are then served up, who are only in the building because the personnel people drafted, scouted, and decided this person can fit at our company. So it's so multi-layered.
Well, it's so funny. I was watching a clip of the New York Giants front office when they were debating what to do with Saquon.
I was watching that again.
Did you see that? And the guy's like, well, what's our identity going to be in the offense? Well, why don't you go ask Brian Daboll, who's going to coach the offense? Why don't you go ask the coaches what they want the identity? To me, look, and you just mentioned it, I've been in 9 different organizations. When there's not a unity and marriage between the front office and the coaching staff and what the vision should be, whether it's for offense, defense, special teams, it's going to be very hard because it is true. As a coach, you should be able to coach the players and put them in the best position to succeed. But if you run a certain system, if you run the West Coast outside zone system, you need different type of linemen than what we needed to run gap scheme runs and the certain pass protections we did with Josh. That's just the reality. And so a great coach will be able to mold his system to those things, but there's certain things that you kind of identify with. And so, like, Mike Onwenu, to me, is a great guard in the system that he was drafted into. Is he a guy who's going to run sideline to sideline on the West Coast outside zone scheme? No, he's not. But you've paid him, and so now I think they've done a good job. We haven't seen that much outside zone, right? That was the big talk before the season.
Right.
Well, I think they realized they were better fit for more gap scheme runs, double team runs, because that's the offensive line that they had for the most part. So you can adapt, but I think there's also, like, if you go into a draft and say, this is our scheme, we need, like Alex Mack, a center I play with in Cleveland, was a tremendous center, but he's totally different than David Andrews. I mean, he was lighter. He could run side to side. He wasn't as big as maybe certain centers were, but he fit that system really well, and that's why he was a all-pro player at that position. So different guys can fit in different schemes, and great players fit in them all, but you have to sit there and, like you said, like, what's our identity? What is our identity going to be? Well, now you know it will be based around Drake and his skill set. So how do you now, when you go into free agency and the draft, what guys are going to basically fall in line with what you want to do with him the most?
And it's interesting, they go into last free agency not knowing who they get at quarterback necessarily, nor even probably in March who they wanted. Now they have that guy. But if we look at the recent history from 20, 21, 22, and 23, they had varying philosophies in the front office. 2022, when you were there, was spent trying to instill and install a little bit of the West Coast principles, correct? With Pierre Strong and Cole Strange as one of the linemen, a little bit more mobile guys who could get outside. And then they have since flipped back in the 2 years since to returning a little bit to gap scheme, but you also have perhaps a Jalen Polk or a Javon Baker who might fit more with Alex's scheme. But you also have Drake Maye, who I can't tell if he's a drop back passer or a Josh Allen passer, a paint by numbers quarterback who would be perfect in a West Coast system. When does it become detrimental if the team doesn't pick a path and stick to it? Because they have wavered significantly. Do you agree with that? That they have no cogent soup to nuts philosophy yet?
Yeah, I think the year started off with Jacoby, and the philosophy was clearly going to be run the ball, protect the ball, play action pass. And then when Drake started to play, I think they actually adapted to what he did really well, more in the shotgun, which then affects the run game, because the more you're in the shotgun, the less productive the run game is. And so they have adapted to what he's done. I think whoever is the offensive coordinator here next year needs to sit down and take a look at, okay, what does we saw a few design runs the past few weeks for Drake. Like that's something you're going to have to continue to develop, because I think it puts a lot of pressure on the defense. Is it RPOs? Is it the whole?
I want to interrupt real quick though. Before they get to talking to the offensive coordinator, don't they need to sit down January 5th or whatever it is after the final game? Well, actually, January 7th, and say, okay, our most important asset is Drake Maye.
Yep.
We have a good guard in Mike Onwenu. We have a couple good tight ends. We'll re-sign Hooper, and we'll have those. We have to rebuild the rest of the offensive line. We're paying Ramondre. He's fine. Let's re-sign Gibson.
Yep.
Then do they say, okay, what kind of offense are we going to run? because
Yes.
Drake's the most important employee in the entire organization and business.
Yep.
And
I 100% agree with you.
can Alex run the offense that best is suited for him? And if not, can they find somebody who's an upgrade? See, that's the big thing. People are
Right.
saying, move on from Alex Van Pelt to what?
Right, that's
He's
the thing.
good. Maybe
because
he's
if
not-
there's a good offensive coordinator, he's going to be interviewing for head coaching jobs,
Yes.
not coming to. And the other thing that people don't understand too is the NFL is all about relationships, and so someone who doesn't have a relationship with with Gerard, like, oh well, you just moved on from that guy. Like, what's the incentive for me to come here? And everyone says, oh, Drake Maye. Well, that's great, but what else? I mean, we've seen this year, like one guy cannot win the game on his own. It's the ultimate team sport, and so I think that's the thing. Like, okay, what do you want to replace it with? And people can serve up their pipe dreams. Oh, Ben Johnson, or
Yes.
there's no those. That is not a guarantee. And so, look, I get it. People are frustrated, but I actually think AVP for a first time play caller has done a really good job with what he's been given, and adjusted the system to fit Drake. And you see, like, the one that pops in my mind that we've seen a few times, and they hit it against the Chargers. One of the good plays was the in cut to Kendrick Bourne. Like, there's plays that you see Drake is very comfortable with. And I think now, after a full season, I mean, 10 starts, maybe 11, 12, whatever it will end up being, you'll have an understanding of what he does really well, what he feels comfortable with, and then you build around that. So I'm actually shocked we haven't seen a lot of like play action boots, but it makes sense because they haven't run the outside zone. So if you can't just run a bootleg if you don't have the run game to go with it. So
Boot meaning
I think,
stretch play and then run to the
Right.
weak side after the
yeah,
flow has
like
gone
you
the other
see,
way.
like you see the 49ers run, like you see
Yeah, he
the
might get
Rams run with
decapitated if you try that. Poor Vidarian
Yeah,
may or may
because-
not even touch the guy in front of him.
the defensive end's not going to honor the run. So much of it is so intertwined. I think what you do is you sit down, and I think Drake has earned the right to say, this is what I feel most comfortable with. This is going forward. It's these drop back passes, it's these play actions, it's the zone read, whatever it is. And I think your term paint by numbers, he clearly is talented to do whatever you ask of him. Now, does he feel comfortable in every area? I'm sure he'll continue to grow more comfortable in certain areas, but there's a lot of ways you can go with him, and then it's just a matter of how you want to build the team around him.
You mentioned a little bit about going out and getting guard or a tackle in free agency or going ahead and getting T. Higgins. And we've all talked about that all season long. But the reality is that in today's NFL, we often see the best players get re-signed by their teams because there's so much friggin' cap space. So the
Yeah.
best guards, tackles, wide receivers end up staying home. That being the case, what is the attractiveness of the New England Patriots other than the fact that they can pay more than anyone else? To me, let me just interject this. I feel as if they may be in the same kind of spot. You might not get a T. Higgins. You might not get Garrett Bowles is already re-signed with Denver. He's not going to hit the market as a tackle. So you might end up with mid-tier free agents. So coaching is, to me, the more important thing to bring a player from average to good. I almost think that the positional coaches, Brian, are more important right now than the players.
In a way, yes. In a way, no. I think the one thing that's hard now in the NFL is coaches know they only have a certain amount of time to get things implemented, coached, all of those things, because look, we're already talking about Gerard's job security. It hasn't even had the job for a full year. And so I think I don't want to say shortcuts, but you're trying to get as much information into these guys as quickly as possible, because you got to get them ready to go as quickly as possible, or else a year, 2 years, you're fired. And so I think you look back in the day, and Tom kind of talks on this, even back to the college, like you used to be able to develop guys. And now there's really not much time for development. So you're right, they're important, but in the same sense, they're like, all right, how simple can I get this to be, to teach the system, to teach these guys what to do? And there's really not delving into the details or the weeds. Like Dante Scarnecchia, the way he coached those guys was so in depth. I mean, talking about a 6-inch step instead of an 8-inch step. I don't know if coaches these days have the time until you're established. And then when you have that established role, you can really kind of narrow down onto that, the minute details. So it's to me, you're right. Like, it's going to be hard the guys that eventually get to free agency, you're going to have to pay them, and pay them really well to get here. And I will say this, like, having been a free agent, sometimes the person's going to go to the best situation for themselves, monetarily, opportunity wise. I don't think anyone should think like, oh, no one wants to come to this team. That's not how it works. I think we like to play it up that way.
Yes, we
But
do.
the reality is when you're a free agent, and it's happened to me several times, and you start getting the calls from teams. And I remember one year it was like to go to the Buffalo Bills to be the starter or go to the San Francisco 49ers to be the starter. I'm like, all right, same opportunity. Who provides more money? Okay, the 49ers up their offer. I have a relationship with Kyle Shanahan. I don't have a relationship with the people in Buffalo. I'm gonna go to San Francisco. Like those are how things really work.
Hmm.
And then you take into consideration, like if T. Higgins, if you over offer him more than $5 million than anyone else is gonna, I bet he's gonna come here. Like that's just the way it's gonna go. He's gonna say, okay, I'm gonna get paid more. They got a decent young quarterback. Like sounds good to me. What else? I mean, very rarely, unless you get to people who are kind of towards the middle or end of their career where they want to win a Super Bowl, they've made their money. Like people aren't going to avoid a situation because it's a bad situation for the most part because they're going to take the money and the opportunity.
And they're going to think they can help make it better.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're a good player. If they're that coveted, they're not going to think that
Yep.
they can walk in and not have an impact.
Right.
But when you do pay a T. Higgins or a DeAndre Hopkins or anyone high-end money and they're making 31, 32, 33 million dollars a year and the next guy is making 18, he is twice as important salary-wise than anybody
Yeah.
else in the organization. So you have to make sure, I would think, Brian, and I'm going to ask your perspective on this, am I right or wrong? You would have to make sure that you're rewarding the right player with
Yes.
a $30+ million a year contract who's not going to be kicking rocks if it's not going his way or Bigfoot in the whole place and saying, you guys don't know what the F you're doing.
Yeah, 100%, which then you got to do your due diligence behind the scenes, right? Because there's really, I mean, look, there's the legal tampering period, but now all that's done is took the illegal tampering and shifted that before the legal tampering period. So you know going in pretty much where you're going to go. So you have to do, very rarely do you get a chance to sit down with a free agent before you sign them. I mean, it just doesn't happen. It's just the way it doesn't work that way. So you better do your due diligence. You better get on the phones with people who know the guy, all of those things. Hey, how's this guy going to be in the locker room? All like, I mean, that's just the reality. So it's not like, back in the day, you were supposed to fly into the city, have dinner, they interview you, you interview them. Every time that I've been a free agent, I knew I was even before you got to the tampering period, like you kind of knew where you were going. So it's things happen so quickly that you have to have all your research done. You got to lay out the people you want and then send your best offer out and hope that it's competitive enough that you can stay in the running until they make that decision.
How strongly should the ownership be scrutinizing a wholesale change right now? Again, when I say that,
Yeah.
we do have a knee-jerk tendency right now to say blow it all up, start again.
Right.
But the question is, you're blowing it up to bring in what? To bring in a new head coach and all position coaches, to bring in a new head coach, a new personnel man, new position coaches, to bring in a new offense, which means everybody's obsolete. There's a lot that goes into blowing it up.
Yeah.
So
there is.
but there is merit to doing it just in the vacuum of they didn't do a full search last year. They said this year would be spent gathering information, evaluating how people did without Bill in the building. Now they've gotten that, and they haven't seen this late season rise. So
Yeah, I think
is
it's
it
hard
good
because
to
they
take
didn't
the
do a lot
step
to
back?
they didn't do a lot to improve the roster. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, you can coach. Look, Bill is the greatest coach of all time. He coached the same he did in year one and whatever the last year was, and they won 4 games. So ultimately, the players step on the field and they ultimately have the control of what happens on the game. And so you didn't do a lot to improve the roster. And you have one less win right now. Who knows what'll happen this last week? My thing is, and you kind of hit this on the one post game show, like hiring like a football overlord, or I know you didn't love that term, but my concern is having been on some bad organizations when the owners start to listen to the fans and the media and all of those things, and it starts to creep in. Like you're the billionaire who owns the team. You made a decision. Stay steadfast in that. Don't worry about the court of public opinion. If you believe in Gerard, stick with Gerard. If you 12 months ago felt this way, give him a full offseason, give him a full learn from the coaching, figure out what he needs, all of those things, and don't listen to us. I mean, you just hope that whenever they're making those decisions, they have someone who's educating them enough about football decisions that give them, like you said, okay, you fired Gerard. Now you're hoping you get Ben Johnson. You're hoping you get Mike Vrabel. Those guys are going to be hot commodities. So they'll be able to pick what team they want to go to. All of those things, it's a big if. Whereas you felt a certain way about Gerard. You hired him. You knew that it was going to be a rough year. It's been a rough year. I know that there hasn't been like a shift towards things getting better, but I would say the team, through injuries, through dealing with all those things, the talent has gotten worse as the season's gone on. And so I feel like in this day and age, it's so quick to pull the trigger and move on to the next thing. But if you believe in Gerard and you believed in him then, you got to give them a year of experience of coaching, figuring out how to make those decisions in game, game planning, all of those things. Give them a chance and really go out and use the money in free agency. They didn't do it last year. Sign some people, draft well, and then see where it lays. You know what I mean? Because
I do.
I that's how I honestly feel about it. And having been around some bad organizations, the bad organizations, they listen to the fans, they listen to the media, they listen to certain players about certain things, and a coach gets fired, and then they're no better than next year. There's no guarantee that if you blow everything up, if you don't improve the roster, there's not going to be much of a change.
You know, as you were talking, I started thinking about this franchise as if it was a steakhouse. And for 25 years, it was the best steakhouse on the planet. No one had ever seen a steakhouse like it. But then the quality declined. Prices were still high. So they made a change. They changed the menu. They changed the ambiance. And now the customers are not coming through the door the same way. And the customers are leaving bad reviews. So you have to do something to appease the customers to make them convinced that this new chef and this new menu is going to be palatable, and you have to get their asses back in. How do you do that? Well, you can't, as a restaurant, start handing out samples on the street. But it's an interesting metaphor when you think about it. Because if you were a restaurant and
you were serving Wagyu for 25 years, and all of a sudden now you're serving ground chuck, and that's like, if the meat's the players, like. Look, I said this to you the other day. Like, if Gerard had taken over in 2019, let's just say Bill won the last Super Bowl and rode off into the sunset, and he took over that team in 2019 and they were 3 and whatever, I'd say, okay, that might be a problem. But right now, you really don't know where he's at because you haven't made the significant improvements of the roster.
Yeah.
So go out, give him the support that he needs, sign some good players, draft some good players, give them the experience from learning for a year, and then see what happens. Because guess what? Next year, there's going to be 4 or 5 coaches who are fired anyways, and the cycle is going to start all over again. It's all going to repeat itself. And so do you possibly miss out on Ben Johnson or Mike Vrabel? Yeah, but there'll be some other media darling candidate next year. So it'll always – and look, the NFL is the greatest business.
But meanwhile, people are still walking past your restaurant. That's what sucks. And you're going to spend another year of bad reviews.
They're still going to buy the tickets. They're still going to be at the games. The TV deals are already done. This is your business, and yes, you take a lot of pride in it. But if you believe in someone, I think you got to give them the proper tools and let them have another go at it before you say, let's scrap it all and then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work out, you say, hey, look, you know what? We made the wrong decision, but now we're going to move forward. And you know what? You'll still have Drake Maye. You'll have whatever draft capital you get, whether it's the first pick this year or whatever you might do, and it'll still be an attractive spot for the next head coach. But I just, in my mind, we're so quick to move on from people and place blame. And to me, I look at Gerard's taking all the blame, and I don't think that that's necessarily the case.
No, I think it's been a major disservice, and they really should be a little bit ashamed of themselves in terms of the way they've allowed Gerard to stand out in front week after week, day after day, press conference after press conference, and take all the slings and arrows with nobody articulating any kind of a vision. Because yes, Gerard's a smart guy. Yes, Gerard can articulate his particular visions, but he is trying to juggle so many balls, and his ability at the podium and to deal with the very difficult questions about direction, discipline, in-game strategy, personnel, all of it have proven a very difficult chore for him to do well, and nobody's helped him out. Nobody else has stood up in
It's a
front
lot
of
to
a
take in
microphone.
your first year, and I think you learn by throwing the same way we say, "Hey, we're going to throw Drake May into the fire." There's going to be some great plays. There's going to be some bad ones too, and so you and I kind of went back and forth in this. No one really. I mean, look, Drake's had some bad plays, but we're like, it's a rookie. He's going to make the like. Okay, how about for the coach? And the only difference, and I made this point to you in that postgame show, is like, what can Gerard do as a coach to get you excited about something? Make go for it on fourth and
It's a
one
great
game
point.
and get it. Like you can't really do much. And so I think Drake's been awesome, but he's made some bad rookie plays, and that's just the reality. And so, but you roll with those, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's roll with some of Gerard's learning mistakes as well, and then see where he goes.
Yeah, you can't say nice punt when it's a good
Right.
decision.
Oh, great decision for punting it and pinning them in the 5. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing to get
Good
excited about.
challenge.
There's only things to critique. Yeah, great challenge. You got that one. Like, but when Drake, gets a free play and lobs it up there for a touchdown, we all get excited.
Right. All right. So, looking towards this last game, what would you do? And I understand you're a former player, but it benefits the Patriots greatly to run the draft and finish with the number 1 overall pick. That means losing to the Bills. Would you try to subtly give passive resistance? And secondarily, would you use Drake for the entire game, none of the game, or a portion of the game and say to Joe Milton, Joe, get down here. Yep, we're going to use you today. How would you approach those two things?
I think it's a lose-lose situation anyway, because if you play your starters, you play Drake and you lose to Buffalo's backups. I mean, no worse way to end the season at home.
It's good. No.
Or if you play your guys and you win, everybody's going to criticize you. You could have had the number 1 pick. What are you doing? And also, you could put your quarterback in harm's way. I know people were like, why is he in at the fourth quarter? But there's a way to, at the end of a game, hey, Drake, we're going to hand the ball off here. It's a quick game. Don't take any hits. Just be smart. Can't do that at the beginning of the game or the whole game. So if I understand, I would, but to me, if you're not going to play Drake, you better be very careful on how you handle the other veteran guys. Because what message does that send? Our rookie quarterback, you're not going to play. You're above everybody else, but everybody else is going to play. I would treat it like a preseason game. I would just say, look, every young guy we have that we need to evaluate, you're playing. Joe Milton, I wouldn't play like Hunter Henry, Hooper, those some of the veteran guys. Like, hey, as many young guys as we can.
Duggar's
to go and
down,
evaluate.
Peppers is down, Yaheem Bell is playing instead of Hooper.
Bell's playing. Yeah. Like Kendrick Bourne, hey, you're going to take an easy one today. We're going to play Polk. We're going to play Baker. Like, we're going to play all the young guys and say, and also, I think it's a slap in those guys' face to just assume that you're going to lose. Because as we've seen in the preseason, sometimes when the backups get in against the backups, like the worst team may have better back. I mean, you just don't know how it's going to go. And so I would make that decision and say, look, Drake, veteran guy, starters, you're not going to play. We're going to treat this like the last preseason game. As many young guys are going to get as many reps, and it's just one more way for us to evaluate. And if we get the first pick, then we get the first pick. If somehow they pull it out, we'll be happy about that too, because guys will have shown that they can play in the league.
You know what's interesting? We always talk about this going into the final week of the season, always talk about it. And what also happens is if the game ends at 4 o'clock, by 4:02, everybody forgets about it and doesn't care.
That's right.
Because it's the last game. If Drake May played 3 series and Joe Milton came in, no one's going to care. Few will remember.
No. Well, and the other thing, too, is Bill used to tell us, only one team's going to finish the year with a win.
Right.
That's the reality. So when whoever wins or loses on Sunday, they'll finish their season the same way as 31 other teams do. And I know people are going to say, oh, you can lose in the Super Bowl. Trust me, having been on a Super Bowl losing team, that's just as rough as losing and being. I mean, you sit there and you think, wow, we did all of this and we came up short. Yeah, you're a better team, but you still lost. Your last game was a loss. And so there's a lot of teams that, I mean, look, there's 31 teams that will finish the season with a loss and one team will win. And then, like you said, guess what? We'll be on to free agency. We'll be on to talking about the draft. It'll be a new season. Everyone will be excited. And that's just the way things go. So that's what makes this the greatest sport. I mean, that's why on Christmas Day, LeBron's like, this is our day. Well, LeBron, the most watched game was like 5 million, and the NFL, which weren't very great games, was 25. People love football. because there's always something to talk about. There's always something to be excited about. And so the Patriots season will end, and then we'll all be sitting here wondering, who are they going to sign? What about the draft? They got the number one pick. Who's going to trade up for it? Which, by the way, you would have much rather had the number one pick last year than this year, but they could be in that position, and you're going to have to leverage it to improve your team as best as you can.
Imagine needing a quarterback right now.
Yeah.
Brian Hoyer, thank you so much for your time. Happy New Year.
You,
You're a
Tom.
great friend, and I really appreciate it.
You too. Happy New Year.